Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Tonight's video is a roll thread, where anons wrote stories based on their post number.
Alright/X/storytime. I've been trying to push this out of my mind ever since, so bear with me. It gets a little fuzzy, but the idea's there. I need a few drinks to digest and puke out the details of whatever the hell happened that day. Summer, let's say 4 years ago, at my uncle's cabin. Really rundown place. Cracks in the windows are covered with duct tape. The ceiling leaks, but it has an earthy feel which I like. Semi-secluded place. 7-Eleven and the rest of society's a 4-mile drive. A few cabins are spaced far out around my uncle, quote, S. There used to be a good amount of partiers, but things have quieted down. I drive down every year. Decide I want to do some exploring. Before heading out, my uncle tells me some weird shit has been going down out there. Screaming and howling noises, not like any animal my uncle has heard before. It's not uncommon for wasted college students to camp it out and do stupid shit, so I brush it off. He shakes his head but waves me off. Tells me not to go out too far. Being the shithead I am, I go out too far. Sun's going down, but it's still light out. It was probably around 7 p.m. I find an opening on the side of a downhill slope. Looks like a really big shelter. The opening is completely dark. The trees surrounding it were extremely close together. Spooked but curious, I decided to squeeze through to get a closer look. I took a few steps forward, and then it hit me. This rancid, gut-wrenching smell burns my lungs. First thing to come to mind was Satan's fiery asshole crusted with shit. I would have hightailed out of there if it weren't for my retardedly high-peaked interest in the opening. I held my breath and pulled out a flashlight. I saw a long tunnel. It didn't seem to end, until I walked a little further through the opening. There was a larger room, a symbol on the wall, and a huge pile of cloth. The moment I saw the cloth, I knew there was something underneath. It was distorted in shape and looked like a large, mangled animal. Scared shitless, I shut off my flashlight and turned my head to walk back by the trees. Everything was completely dark. I flicked my flashlight on again and aimed it at the tunnel by reflex. The cloth was twitching. It wasn't like that subtle eye twitch. It was propelling itself forward in a seizure-like state. I spun around and managed to run all the way back to my uncle's cabin. The worst part, besides feeling that thing's presence as I was running, was the sound. There wasn't any. As big as it was, it didn't make any noise despite creeping toward me really fast. The trees were another pain in the ass, but thinking about it now, it seemed like they formed a barrier or a cage around the opening. But yeah, that's about it. I haven't been to my uncle's place ever since. He now drives to my place every year and likes to fuck with me about it, telling me stories of cult near the area. I never bought the ritual bullshit, but now I believe every word.
I live in rural Virginia now. Moved here about 2 years ago. I used to live in DC, which might be right next to Virginia, but let me tell you, feels like a world away. I used to live there, had a nice little place off the hill back when I was a congressman. But in Obama's first term, right when my chances of getting re-elected were looking like the opposite of the blood pressure of a pig in a slaughterhouse, I got a call. Friend of mine, a guy I used to work with who wanted to met with me, told me he heard about my numbers. Said if I didn't win re-election, give him a call. He might have a position I'd be interested in. See, that's how networking works. You know somebody, they help you out. Somebody knows you, they help you out. I got this guy, my friend, in at the State Department a few years ago, and friends don't forget favors. I know I won't. Damn, it's hot out today. Feel like I'm going to melt. So I met my friend, I'll call him Bill. Bill told me he had left government work a few years back when he hooked up with this organization. He said it was full of guys like him, like me. Once upon a time ago, insiders who knew the system and could help a company learn which ropes to jump over, which bridges you ain't ever want to burn, and where some of the bodies are buried. I was interested, and then he let a number slip, and I got a shit ton more interested. The salary was about 3 times more than what I made on the Hill. So I met up with Bill's people. I'd like to say they seemed nice, but my mama always told me even whores tell the truth about their clients, so let me be honest. These were terrible people. There were 3 of them, all accents and aftershave, sunglasses and swishy walks. I caught up with them at their office in Georgetown. Big loft office space. Windows from the floor to the ceiling. Big wood floors. Nice, real nice, but not for me. The 3 of them were interested in space shit. Private exploration. Like a non-government NASA. I didn't really give a shit. I was on board as soon as they told me how much they paid and what they needed. See, DC is a town where if you want to get something done, you gotta know somebody, and they didn't know anybody, like me out here, rotting away in the sun. So I went to dinner with congressmen, senators, their staff. I met with lawyers for cabinet officials. I got drunk with the majority whip, and I made it known how my 3 boys wanted to make America #1 again in space travel. How we could get back the future we used to dream about. How my guys had enough money to lift all boats in the ocean if they knew what I was saying. And I guess they did, because a few months later, my boys had their government contracts all lined up and their space shuttle takeoff all scheduled. And they just wanted to thank me. They took me out to some bar that was too young for me, but I had a blast. Had a few drinks too many, but it happens to everybody. I woke up the next day and felt pretty goddamn good about myself. Except the stomach ache. The whole next week it kept bothering me until I finally gave in and got ready to go to the hospital. But as soon as I touched the door, I screamed. My stomach felt like it was on fire. I couldn't even stand up. It was throbbing so bad. It felt full. And something else. Like it had something in it. I touched my stomach. It moved. I threw up. I couldn't even stand. I looked down at my stomach and saw it ripple. It pushed up, like something was trying to get out of it. I remember screaming, and then I remember Bill. I was in my bed. He was in the chair next to me. He didn't look good. "I'm here to help you, buddy," he said. "But I want to tell you I'm sorry first. I'm sweating right now like a Redditor in confession on this here porch. Let me try to finish. Bill told me back at my townhouse that those 3 guys weren't exactly what they seemed. That they might not even be guys, or girls for that matter. And that spaceship they were so keen on launching wasn't going up empty. You see, they had a job to do. They had to produce some results. They had numbers to worry about. And when their little project down here came up short a few specimens, they decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and use me for, what did Bill call it? Oh yeah, an inoculating tank. That's what he called me. They moved me out here to the middle of goddamn nowhere, where I don't know anybody and no one can help me. I can't walk, not really. I just sit here, swelling in the heat. Honeysuckle is blooming. The air tastes sweet. Bill told me a couple of people have survived this, that when this thing comes out of my stomach, all red from my organs with its pale, lidless eyes, it might leave me intact enough that I'll be okay. I guess I'll find out. It's so goddamn hot out today.
When my aunt passed away, I was left to clean out whatever the other relatives didn't poach from her home. Sentimental items I could understand, but fighting over a waffle iron is just ridiculous. I boxed up old clothes, tossed out broken furniture and moulding paperbacks. Plenty of things got donated or put in a dumpster, but I kept a small bit the more interesting items other family members left behind. Some old books, knick-knack jewellery, and a small chest of toys from the attic. There were a couple antique Tonka trucks I could restore, board games, and a small porcelain doll with a miniature wardrobe of clothes. Her paint was a little worn, and hair a bit dull, but she was in good condition. No signs of being glued back together or mishandled. The little outfits looked handmade. I think she was a childhood toy my aunt held on to up through the years. The little wardrobe even had a mirror. She stood about 10 inches tall, smaller than most dolls of her type, and her build wasn't as fancy. She was mostly a sand-filled cloth body, with porcelain hands, feet, and head. She had to be sat in chairs or laid down, and couldn't stand on her own, as a lot of other dolls with their stiff legs could. On the back of her body, stitched rather poorly, was the name Anne. I spent a weekend fixing up the trucks as a gift to my nephew, and rearranging my bookshelves to display the old board games. It was about a month before I decided on what I wanted to do with Anne. I was going to build her a miniature house. I enjoyed miniatures as a teen, but had fallen out of the hobby. I needed something to occupy my time, so this could be fun. I measured out the scale and found some blueprints that were simple, yet nice. It took a month to assemble the house, another month to paint, wallpaper, and put together furnishings. My brother announced that his wife was pregnant with their second child, a girl. Maybe someday I can give her the DollHouse and Anne. It was a simplistic house, not nearly as detailed as some miniatures are, but I was proud of it. I moved Anne and her wardrobe in, placing her by the tiny bedroom window. I amused myself over the weeks by changing her clothes and placing her in different parts of the house. I brought the whole display out during a small party to show off my handiwork. My friends adored Anne and her little house, moving her around, playing with her clothes, and building little stories for her. The morning after the party, I noticed Anne was in the kitchen of her little home, with several of the miniature knives jammed in the table. I was quick to blame Jess, a friend who wanted nothing to do with her the night before. She whined about how dolls were creepy and scowled all night about it. Repairing the table took 3 days. As time wore on, I spent less and less time with Anne. I checked up on her on the weekends, but didn't really play with her anymore. I also noticed small things being damaged in the house. Several dresses developed holes needing to be patched, and I set out mousetraps, wallpaper peeled up, needing to be glued back down. A month before my niece's birth, my brother came to visit. They gushed about how cute the little house was and how pretty Anne looked. It took a while for me to notice crayon scribbles along the floor of the house after they left. My nephew is still so young, scolding him so long after the fact was pointless, but I figured I would talk to him the next time I see them. I took a small vacation a few months after my niece's birth to see the family and celebrate with them. I was only supposed to be gone a week. It wasn't 3 days before I got a frantic call from a neighbour. My house had caught fire. The house wasn't totaled, but there was a lot of damage, mostly water damage. An investigator was called in, mostly to appease the insurance company, and it was determined that the fire started where the DollHouse once stood. It was nothing but charred bits and ash now, such a shame. I had a friend stopping by to check on the house, to make sure nothing was amiss. Perhaps they brought over Jess, and she still felt bitter and angry. She had a nasty habit of wrecking things out of anger. I stopped suspecting Jess when I noticed Anne was missing completely. Not a scrap of her was found, nor any part of the hardwood wardrobe.
Arnold wakes up in a cold sweat, terrified. He can't remember exactly what he dreamed about, but he does remember teeth. Sharp teeth, yellow teeth, like coffee-stained blades in a row in something's mouth. He stares at his ceiling fan, counting. He eventually falls asleep. The next night, he wakes in a cold sweat. He remembers pointed protrusions, gray and shining in what dim, flickering light there was. He stares at his ceiling fan, counts, and eventually falls asleep. The third night, he remembers the eyes, empty, lifeless, yet somehow seem to have a blaze within them. A formidable flame deep in the skull of whatever it was he had seen. He stares at his ceiling fan and counts, but he cannot fall asleep. The next day, Arnold returns home from work. He drops his keys on the counter carelessly and turns to the stairs. He's exhausted and wants to go right to sleep. He stops in his tracks. Crouched at the foot of the stairs is something literally out of his nightmares. The creature perched between him and his stairs has grotesque, calloused skin, a dark shade of red like it is blood-stained. The eyes burn at him in the low light of his kitchen. The teeth, too many of which reside in the creature's mouth, glint at him, a disgusting shade of yellow. The creature's gray, shining horns extend from its head. It makes a sickening, cracking sound as it begins to stand, its joints popping as it seems to grow. Arnold backs into the wall, grabbing wildly for something, anything, to fight off the creature attacking him. He grabs a cleaver, and the rest of his knives fall on the floor. He jumps at the creature and hacks at it with the cleaver. It pushes him onto the floor and proceeds to force his body onto the blades of the knives. It slowly bleeds out and collapses next to him. The police department had heard reports of a disturbance from the man's house. They reported there and carefully entered the house. Upon entering, they found the owner of the house. He was lying on the floor, knife handles protruding from each part of his body. The police found out that Arnold had stopped taking his medication to stop the hallucinations. They came to the conclusion that something he had seen had driven him to impale himself. They declared the case a self-termination. Maybe they wouldn't have if they had checked his ceiling fan.
When I was a young lad, I knew a professor obsessed with mirrors. He was not a very brilliant man, nor could I say he was clever. His days went by, as far as I could tell, in a drunken haze of ranting and smashing, anything showing a reflection. At first, I thought he was ashamed of his hobo-like appearance, but from those somewhat incoherent ravings, I quickly ascertained that his feelings towards the rather mundane objects we use to check our appearance and practice public speaking are the cause of his distress. He felt that even the most common looking-glass was a thing of abject horror. My pals and myself found his insanity quite hilarious. We would always get him loaded and, when he least expected it, pull out a bunch of hand mirrors and circle around. He would usually vomit, cry, and pass out. I would never have guessed he was a professor at all if not for the ID I found in his wallet when snagging some cash. Little did I know that all of our fun and games would come to an end the day I discovered that he was the most sane man of us all. I can remember the night quite clearly. The trees stood still, without so much as a breeze to disturb them, and the full moon shone bright. I was wandering down a back road in my quiet country town when I noticed a dark form standing on the edge of the wooden dock attached to the local lake. As I got closer, I realized it had a horrible stench and hunched-over posture. Panic gripped me until I recognized the smell of booze hidden beneath the smell of shit, piss, and God knows what else. I called out to the professor in greeting, but he didn't so much as turn his head. His eyes were transfixed on the water below him. I held my breath and stood beside him. His gaze did not break. For a few moments I stared with him down onto the smooth, black surface of the lake, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Something about what I saw was definitely unsettling. I could see the empty void of the still waters, and atop it the round moon, the twinkling stars dotting the sky, and even my own handsome face. Nothing strange stood out, until I realized what was missing. The professor was bent over the edge even further than I, yet his reflection was absent. Terror and bewilderment gripped me as my eyes darted from the old man to the clear, reflection-less space below. My mind raced to make sense of it. I never got the chance. Before I could react, the professor violently jerked forward and tumbled like a rag doll down into the lake. The police would ask me why I didn't jump in to try and save him. I told them I couldn't swim. Of course, I left out two very important pieces of information in fear of being labeled insane. The first is that mysterious missing reflection which filled me with dread. The second, and main reason why I fled rather than try and play the hero, is that when he fell into the blackness, I saw no ripples and heard no splash, as if he never touched the water at all.
I had seen it several times through the window. I even almost bumped into it once. I was checking the power generator out back, and when I came back inside, I saw it start to turn the corner. I had been staying in a cabin my father left after he died, to clear my head. The bear was clearly rabid. You could tell. It was scared and stressed yet aggressive, judging by its body language, like the animal equivalent of a delirious madman. I had known there was something out there since I moved to the cabin. I had found several dead animals, including rabbits, foxes, and a couple of elk in the woods. They were chewed up. It was odd, though. Often it looked like there was only a bite in the neck, and they were drained. Some of them were actually alive for a while, albeit just barely. They would crawl along the ground with no life in their eyes. If they weren't moving, you'd think they were dead. I decided to use my rifle to give them a quick death. The weirdest part is that I would often find the teeth of what I presume were the dead animals around my house. They were pulled out, down to the root. This leads me to my current predicament. In retrospect, I should have done several things differently. The most obvious would have been shooting the bear when it ventured into my backyard. However, you see, the cabin's generator went out. I planned to wait until morning to check it, but then I saw something. I found the rabid bear that stalked the woods near the generator. The thing, though, was that it was dead, its neck cut open. It was next to the generator, which was smashed, clearly deliberately. After a minute of staring at it, I could have sworn I heard a familiar noise somewhere. Naturally, I was creeped out, so I ran inside and locked the doors. I searched everywhere for my rifle but couldn't find it. I slowly realized that several other items, including knives, a fire poker, and a woodsman's axe, were also missing. I then had to reach a terrifying conclusion. The bear and the generator were merely a diversion. Someone had slipped in while I made that gruesome discovery. After what felt like an eternity, I decided to try to reach my car. I managed to get there only to discover something that made my heart sink. The steering wheel was torn off, and there were deep bite marks on it. I thought I heard something and ran back inside, barricading myself in my room. I now have my back against my bed, which is pushed against the door. I can hear it, though. That noise. It's outside my door. Every now and then I can feel something trying to push the door open. I think I recognize the noise now, unfortunately. It's the sound of chattering teeth.
I shouldn't be moving out of this apartment. I only moved in a month ago, and this place easily blows my old place out of the water. There's nothing wrong with it, physically at least. It's what happened here, or rather in the next apartment building over, that's causing the problem. And it's not just the guilt over what happened either. I'll try to explain as best I can. You see, my apartment has a window. Seems like no big deal, right? Well, next to my apartment, about 15 feet across from my building, is another apartment building. It was often noisy during the day and would quiet down at night. I could see into other people's apartments through their windows. It made things awkward, especially when some of the families got into fights. You could hear slapping and things being thrown. It was often between adult couples, but you could occasionally hear people fighting with their kids. I know I should have done something about it, but the thing is, I can't quite explain why I didn't. The people in that building were lower class than me. They scared me. One of the ones that scared me the most, though, was the boy. I was lying on my couch one night about to go to sleep when I looked out the window and saw him. It was a little kid. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't make him out very well, but I could tell he was staring at me with a sad expression and what looked like dark-colored eyes. After we made eye contact for a minute, he suddenly jolted and moved away from his window. I sat up and thought about what happened for a minute. Feeling like a pedophile, I went to the kitchen where I didn't have any windows. After a minute, I went to my bedroom, closed the blinds, and got in bed. All through the night, as I was trying to sleep, I could hear the family in that kid's apartment screaming. From what I could make out, the father was screaming at the kid at first, and the mother was trying to defend him. Suddenly, the kid says something I couldn't quite make out, and then, a couple of seconds after he finishes talking, the dad goes ballistic. I could hear a physical struggle, with glass breaking and someone getting knocked down. I was about to get up. I was going to call the cops, but I just lay there. I figured someone else would do it. When I woke up in the morning, I couldn't hear any sound from the apartment. I was worried for a second, so I put on my glasses and looked out the window, and I saw the boy again. In full daylight, and with my glasses on, I could see that he was pale, almost like an albino, and his eyes were clearly black, with a dead look to them. I turned away and sat on the couch, occasionally turning my head to see him standing there, staring at me. It creeped me out, so I went out to get a meal and see some friends. When I came back, he wasn't there at first. I went to bed, and as I was nodding off, I looked and saw him there in the same place as before. I knew he was staring at me, so I took a sleeping bag I had and slept on the kitchen floor. Over the next week or so, I saw him on and off. My fear of him had begun to lessen. Eventually, I stopped turning away when I saw him staring. I would study his gaze. There was something underneath those dead, lifeless eyes, a hint of sorrow. As the days went on, I could see the sorrow fading and being replaced by something else. Then the day came. 2 days, really. It was late in the evening, and I found myself staring at the boy. He definitely had black eyes. As I was gazing at him, a man walked up to another window of the apartment. I believed this man to be the boy's father. He started screaming at me, demanding to know why I was staring into his windows. I told him that I was staring at his son. There was an awkward, tense pause before he, with a confused look on his face, told me to fuck off, saying that he would kill me if he saw me staring at his apartment again. I spent several minutes in the kitchen thinking about what happened and whether that man was right to scream at me. Was it possible I was some sort of creep, paying this much attention to a relatively young boy like that? As I tried to get some sleep that night, I had a repeat of that earlier night. The boy was not present this night, but there was screaming. It was only the man and the woman this time. I thought I could hear the kids being mentioned, along with something about the police, but I dozed off. As I did, I caught a glimpse of the kid, for what could have been anywhere between seconds and hours. This time, his look was not dead. Rather, the look of sorrow deep in his black eyes was clearly visible. It looked like he was going to cry. I know what I should have done, but I don't know why I didn't do it. I woke in the morning and spent an hour in bed, unsure if I was still dreaming. I looked toward the kid's window and saw that the blinds were shut. I could see into the other window and saw what looked like police officers walking around. I jolted up and got my stuff ready. I went outside and saw a small crowd gathered around the apartment. I was about to ask what had happened, but then I stopped. I came to the realization that I both didn't want to know what had happened in that apartment and that, on some level, I already knew. Despite all of what I described, that's not the reason I'm moving. You see, I've overheard gossip. People talking about what happened in the building next to mine. I believe it was even in the news, but I didn't get a chance to see the report. You see, I heard two guys on the elevator say something. One of them said, "You heard what happened in the building next door? First the kid disappears, then the husband does that to his wife." After thinking about what they said for a while, I started looking for a new apartment. What made me pack my bags and decide to move into a motel for a while, though, was what happened last night. I was sitting there thinking about that child, and I remembered when I first and last saw him. Now that I think about it, the first time I saw him, his eyes weren't black. They were brown, and they didn't look dead but rather sad. But the last time I saw him, he was sad at first, more so than any other time I saw him. During the split second I fell asleep that night, his expression changed into something I won't be able to forget. The sadness on his face was replaced with both anger and disgust. And deep down in my heart, I knew he was right.
He won't want you to hear this story, the true story of this world and how it truly works, and maybe it's best you don't hear it. It's gotten people into trouble in the past, trouble far greater than legal or financial trouble, for they have far more power than any police officer, judge, or government. Hell, they have a significant amount of power over those very structures. The amount of damage that has come to those who understand my message destroyed them in ways no man could, which is why having full knowledge and understanding of these events hurts so much. The only thing more painful than knowing the truth is knowing the fact that anyone who fights for it will suffer the ultimate punishment. Society curses the rebel. Authoritarian fools will claim to be fighters for freedom, often by attacking those with less power than them, while actual rebels, those who truly oppose corrupt and tyrannical power structures, are viewed as punks, madmen, or heretics. A long time ago, I was a high-ranking authority in an extremely powerful and extremely corrupt organization. I served the leader of this organization well. I was considered to be one of his greatest agents. I remember how it started. You see, this organization was into controlling people. If they had control over you, then you had to obey their every order. If they told you to jump, they would expect you to be 6 feet in the air. And if they told you to run, you had better be gone in a heartbeat. The people they controlled were often primitive, on par with a caveman or something of that nature. I highly doubt they could understand what these orders meant in many cases, or for that matter, why they should follow them. Although all those involved in this organization were slaves to some extent, there was a new faction that the leader had spawned. The members of this faction had no idea where they were and only had a vague idea of what was going on. They couldn't understand the complexities of the situation, as well as both I and the older members could. In this newer faction, you often weren't just the slave to the leader, but to other more loyal members of the faction. Even if you were greater than them in every way, you had to respect this degrading role. There was a woman. She was primitive, but she was smart. She didn't want to follow the system she was born into. She rebelled against her husband, who was given control over her. Me and the other agents were shocked by this. Some were outraged at this heresy, whereas others were impressed, although we were fearful to admit it. The idea of rebellion against the leader was unheard of amongst the agents, and coming from someone who was, at the time, more or less the lowest on the totem pole was shocking. She fought well, but she was defeated. At the time, I didn't know what had happened to her, but she changed the way I viewed the world. She had planted the seeds of my doubt, my rebellion. I knew deep in my heart that I should have helped her. I could have saved her. The boss knew of my doubt. I could see the suspicion in his eyes. I started doing research, not into the past, but the future. I could use my connection to understand the leader's goals and plans. They were horrific, truly demonic. There was going to be a body count, a massive one, with towns, cities, and even civilizations destroyed. I knew I had to stop it. There were others like me who had doubts. I was able to split the organization in two. About a third were loyal to me. We started a rebellion. The conflict was massive, likely the greatest in history. We fought well. It seemed like we would win. There was hope. We could bring forth freedom. That woman's sacrifice would not be in vain, and yet we failed. The dream was dashed. Darkness would rule the land, a darkness that lasts to this day. I've fallen. I am now in a prison that can never truly be escaped. I am not alone in this place. My brethren I served alongside in the rebellion are also here. The woman is here alongside me too. The greatest pain I have now is not my own, or even the fact that my friends suffer down here with me. The greatest pain, I'm afraid, is knowing the leader's plans for that primitive faction of beings the woman was a member of. A fate far worse than anything they could do to themselves, no matter how hard they try, often in his name. So I say this, remember, mankind, that a servant is in many cases but a slave, and a slave is often but a tool. But when a slave's master does not see him as a tool but as a toy to be played with, it is to be remembered that the master will grow bored of his toys. And then, hopefully for you, mankind, you will only be disposed of, for in the end a good shepherd is still leading his sheep to the slaughter.
We're Dr. Doolittle now. Kinda hard to make it spooky, but whatever. Ever since my grandparents died, I've spent most of my time alone in the house they left me. I'm a NEET, surviving off the inheritance money. I was an only child. My parents died when I was young. I like being alone, and this is a fairly big house, but I'm not totally alone. My grandparents had this old gray cat that seems to be just as old as they were. Fucking thing hates me. Whenever I try to pet it, my hand generally ends up covered in cuts and whatnot. It's constantly hissing whenever I'm near, so I left it in a room and occasionally give it some food. It stays out of my way, and I stay out of its. After a few months by myself, I had started to feel a little uneasy in the big house. I felt uncomfortable leaving lights off and not being able to see down the long hallways. I could have sworn I heard some weird-sounding voices from time to time, too. I put this down to not going out enough and started to go for walks around the neighborhood. The cat and I had started to grow suspiciously accepting of each other, and it would no longer hiss at me when I entered its room. That being said, whenever I entered, it would always be staring right at me, tail flicking, its light green eyes looking slightly vexed, but not hissing. Weird cat. I left its window open so it could look outside and go on adventures and, hopefully, leave and never come back. Late one night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. It was extremely windy outside, so various things were banging against the house, and the constant rustling of leaves kept me wide awake. I heard the groaning of a door slightly opening down the hallway, but put it down to the wind to calm my paranoia. Then I hear the same noise at my door. My eyes are closed now, trying to ignore everything and just sleep. I feel the mattress lower slightly near my feet. I open my eyes and see the cat. It opens its mouth. It is time.
Mundane horror.
One day I woke up, my brain still in a fog about what's a dream and what's real, hearing my father's voice echo through my head, mocking my insecurities and fears in an inhuman goofiness that has always been his way. My life is horror, not deep horror with excitement and eldritch abominations, but a mundane horror where everyone is a passive-aggressive demon that somehow, though impossible, knows all your insecurities and doubts, often saying odd things that set you off to the point where suicide seems like the only option. Going to work, the faces are the worst thing to see. The smiles and the eyes always pointing in your direction, but not quite. Demons are all I can say to describe people. Monsters with odd and often sadistic purposes that revolve around insecurity and retribution. The true horror in my life is the mystery of existence itself, the sketchiness of it all eating away at you. When did man become twisted, whimpering ants with no control over their lives? Choices are nothing more than options of being a part of the same oppressive machine that constantly becomes more controlling as time goes on. People are nothing more than wannabes of the same worn-out themes played over and over again on media. And as I think about how messed up everything is, I realize nothing can be done to stem man's incurable illness called society. And I go back to sleep.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.